You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind. How do you get to know how I feel inside?
What's up YouTube? My name is Ruff, and today we're going to look at a typical pop vocal chain and break down the thought process and decision making behind it. Okay, so now we have Ableton open, and for the purpose of this video, we're going to be using just a royalty-free acapella from Splice. And the reason for that is because the songs I write for myself or for other artists, if they go out through labels, they can run into copyright problems. So it's just easier for the sake of the video to use a royalty-free acapella that anyone with a Splice account has access to. So again, totally dry. This sounds like this.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
So this is a good vocal recording, a nice clean take, not a lot of background noise. And if we look at the peaks here, they're pretty even throughout. We have some jumps in the dynamics compared to others, but overall, this is a good clean take to start with before we go into any processing. Now, from what I'm hearing in the vocal, I don't think this needs on my end any auto-tune, but if you were to use auto-tune, I typically like to start the chain with the auto-tune plugin and then do all the other processing afterwards, just so you know that the vocal's all tuned up before it's hitting your compression and your reverb and etc. I like to start the chain with auto-tune if it needs it, but other people put it in the middle of the chain or at the end. It's really all to taste. So now the first thing I would put on the chain is the first round of compression, and this compression's meant to kind of control the dynamics and the peaks of the vocal. So for this, I like to use the Wave CLA 3A. I like to put it on the start me up setting, and then I'll just kind of adjust the peak reduction and gain knobs till it's hitting about -3
You
on the
hold
compressor.
me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
And then I'll use the gain to kind of make back up some of that compression, but I don't like to go too crazy past -3 on the peak reduction. And if you're looking for a stock Ableton replacement and you don't have this plugin, just type in generic compressor. It's a preset on the stock Ableton. Other producers might frown at this, but you could just pretty much like 8 out of 10 times drag this generic compressor setting just straight on the vocal and it'll get it pretty close to where it needs to go.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
So I like to look at compression as two separate but connected processes. So the first round of compression, which we just went over, is to control the dynamics and the peaks. Then I like to do a second set of compression to bring the vocal to life in the mix. And I like to split it into two separate compressors, so one compressor isn't trying to do both jobs. For this, I like to use the Waves RVox. I like to use the Chris Baysford lead vocal preset, and then I'll just kind of tweak this knob till it feels right.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
That'll just kind of add a lot of presence to your vocal when it's in the context of the entire mix. And if you're looking for an Ableton stock replacement for this, again, I swear, just type in Mix Gel, and this will get it pretty close too.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
So if we're going with just the two stocks, if I turn them off,
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
put them back on, and look at the life that it adds.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
After compression, I like to move on to some de-essing just to get rid of some of those sibilant S and ch sounds. So I like to use the FabFilter Pro DS, and I like to use the single vocal, if it's a female in this case, the wideband, and I'll just kind of adjust the range until it doesn't feel overdone but kind of limits some of those S sounds.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind. You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
Then after our de-essing, I like to do some saturation, and I like the a bit warmer Ableton stock compressor. If we turned it up to totally 100% wet, watch your ears, but it'll sound like this.
You hold me close.
We're not going to rev it up that much. We're going to back it off. I like to go like, 10, 15% max, just to add a little bit of that analog grit.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
Simple, just add that warmth. Now we move on to the fun part, the delay and the reverb. So this is the delay I typically like to use. It's just a 16th note Waves H delay. You can use the Ableton stock delay as well. I just bought this one, so I'm feeling inclined to use it, even though you don't really need to. And I'm gonna kind of break down and reverse engineer what all of this is. So if I pull the delay out, 100% wet, it's gonna sound like this.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
So it's giving that, side to side pan, wide stereo width feel, which is what I'm looking for personally out of this delay. I don't want it to be that in your face. I want it to be kind of underneath the dry vocal. So how we achieve that is I like to do it in Ableton through a parallel send. So what I would do is hit Command G on Mac, and that's going to put it in an audio effect rack. I'm going to click this, I'm going to name this wet, and then I'm going to create another parallel chain that I'm going to name dry. So now we have the dry signal without any delay.
You hold me close.
And the wet signal with 100% delay.
You hold me close.
And we're mixing them together using the volume here. Now this is kind of the sidechain rack that I like to use when I'm sidechaining things of this nature. So if I kind of pull this in after the delay, I have it sidechained to the vocal. So the wet vocal's only gonna have the delay on it when the vocal's not playing because it's sidechained to this black or the audio file. So it'll play in these gaps only. Here's it at 100% wet on the sidechain with equal wet and dry balance.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
So that's kind of what I'm looking for it to just fill those gaps, but again, not as present. And I would automate this spot here because it sounded a little awkward. So I would simply just take the sidechain and turn it off here.
You can read.
So we get that little spot, and then I would kind of turn this down to maybe -12, and we would get something like this.
You can read my mind. How do you?
Perfect. Exactly what I'm personally looking for in this scenario out of a delay. Now is when I would typically do reverb, and I like to split reverb up into two groups as well. So this is the first reverb. I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb, but the Ableton stock reverb with the same decay, pre-delay, all these times, if you wanted to copy these for Valhalla or for the Ableton stock, should get the same effect. This is just the sound that Valhalla opens up to, and it sounds great. So like, why change it? I'm just low cutting it and high cutting it a little bit. I brought the mix down to 10%. And I brought the decay down, but this is just for the vocal to sit in this case, a concert hall.
You can read my mind. How do you get to know how I feel inside?
So I'm not parallel sending this reverb. I'm just putting the mix at around 10% to give it that spacious feel around the entire vocal. Then the secondary reverb, again, Valhalla, just on the amazing vocal preset in the Don Gunn section here, 100% on the mix knob. The decay I like to leave around like 4 seconds, and then I'm parallel sending it. I'm not sidechaining it to the vocal, but I want that parallel send and that balance, so I have it at -12.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
We could probably go a lot less. -24 sounded a lot more natural. So with both reverbs,
you hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
we're putting it into two separate but connected rooms, one around the entire vocal and one parallel send and balance between the 100% wet and the 100% dry, just to give that really spacious and overwhelming feeling to the vocal through the reverb. Now this is pretty controversial and self-explanatory. Some people love it, some people hate it. OTT with 20% on the depth. You can mess around with the upward and downward compression knobs, but I like OTT on vocals. Some people don't, but I think it adds a nice, cool, bright texture.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
And then just dial it back. Not a big deal, no need to go crazy over it. Then I like to end my chain with an EQ with a low cut, just taking out some of those unnecessary low frequencies.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind.
And then I like to do just a slight, maybe at most, maybe 2 to 3 decibel boost in the highs.
You hold me close, you can read my mind.
Just to add some more air to the vocal. Then I would do, a corrective EQ. I like Soothe for this, and I like to put it on the delta mode and just find the problematic frequencies and then dip them.
You hold me close, tell me that you
And I like to
can
put the
read
listen
my
on as well.
mind. How do you get to know how I feel inside?
And kind of take note of what I just did there. I listened in isolation in the context of the delta and then bypass through the whole mix just to kind of see, is it problematic in isolation? Is it problematic across the vocal? And then is it problematic outside of the bubble of Soothe? If it is, cut it out. No more than
You
like
hold
maybe
me close,
3 to
tell
6
me-
on the depth knob max. You don't want it to sound overdone, but Soothe or any other dynamic EQ plugins, great for getting rid of those problematic frequencies before you hit the final step of the chain. I personally like to end the chain with just another compressor with a high ratio, pretty pretty fast attack and pretty mid-release, no makeup gain, just to kind of condense and glue everything together at the end so you have your final vocal that sounds like this.
You hold me close, tell me that you can read my mind. How do you get to know how I feel inside?
And obviously this is in isolation, we have no instrumental around it. This should just be pretty drag and drop within the context of an entire mix to really stand out and fill the spectrum and be the focus, which in pop music is what you want the vocal to achieve.